When someone like Bill Shorten leaves politics, someone that took a run at the top job but missed out, there's always that sense of what might have been, the Gwyneth sliding doors thing. Some people might forget the narrow defeat at the 2016 election, but I think few would forget the unexpected loss at the 2019 election, or as Scott Morrison preferred, the victory for the quiet Australians. For me, that was the sliding doors moment. I spent most of Morrison's term shaking my head, thinking that in whatever national crisis we were experiencing at the time, we could have had this guy instead of this guy. I mean, imagine. Imagine where we might be if Shorten had gotten over the line in 2019 and he'd been able to implement his housing agenda. But instead now that agenda appears to be something that the Labor government appear unwilling to entertain, instead leaving it for others to fight the good fight.
Is it such a wild imagining?
Look, there was a lot to like about Bill Shorten, the Labor leader, and history will probably look back on his time in federal politics kindly, for the most part anyway, in that what could have been kind of way that occasionally happens when we look back on politicians that almost made it to the top but didn't quite get there. It's been interesting to watch the media as they demonstrate no real indication of self-reflection, as they seem to be lamenting what might have been and reflecting on the bold policy platform that Shorten ran with. I mean, there's not much discussion around the role they played in helping to tear it down at the time, while pumping up the tyres of the guy from marketing, mind you, but anyway. This isn't a video about Bill Shorten or his resignation. This is about something he said during his political resignation announcement / press conference. Something I found a little bit jarring. This.
I am pleased that we brought the previous government to justice over Robodebt.
Really, I think that was news to a lot of people. How many people have been charged or prosecuted over Robodebt? How many people have actually been fired even? From where I stand, I've seen no real signs of justice. Remember, and this is important, Robodebt was found to be illegal, a fact that gained global attention. It was a scheme that should never have gotten off the ground to begin with, but once it did, it should not have survived the early months of 2017, by which time the Royal Commission found the unfairness, probable illegality and cruelty of the scheme were publicly laid bare. But despite all that, those involved in the scheme allowed it to continue to illegally raise debts against some of society's most vulnerable. Now, keeping that context in mind, let's take a quick look at some of the big name players, and you tell me whether or not you think that justice has been served. Let's start with this guy. The Robodebt Royal Commission report was scathing in its assessment of Scott Morrison, finding that he knew what was going on, that he allowed Cabinet to be misled, and that he failed to meet his ministerial responsibilities. But what about justice? Well, in the end, Scott Morrison continued to smirk his way through Parliament until he resigned on his own terms to take up what is no doubt a lucrative private sector role. Then there's Stuart, who seemed to spend large slabs of his political career embroiled in one scandal or another. For example, in 2016 he was found to have acted inconsistently with the Statement of Ministerial Standards and was subsequently dumped from the ministry after he took a trip to Beijing to oversee a mining deal involving a major Liberal donor. There was also this Rolex watch thing, then there was the almost 40 grand he racked up in home internet bills that he would eventually have to repay. Any one of those things would likely get you shown the door at most places, not promoted again. Oh, and then there's this whole palaver that looks like it'll play out in court via defamation proceedings. But anyway, despite his track record and despite Robodebt, Scott Morrison's former flatmate, the guy he called Brother Stewie, was also allowed to resign of his own accord, and now appears to be holding a couple of CEO gigs. Then we've got Alan Tudge, who, like Brother Stewie, was no stranger to a headline. The Royal Commission report highlighted that his position came with a significant amount of public power, and that his use of information about social security recipients in the media to distract from and discourage commentary about the scheme's problems represented an abuse of that power. The Guardian put it a little differently with the headline, "How the Coalition Collaborated with Friendly Media to Silence Robodebt Victims." Like Morrison and Robert, Tudge was able to resign in his own time. Then there was Kathryn Campbell, a public servant, not a politician, but as the Royal Commission found, Campbell was responsible for a department that had established, implemented and maintained an unlawful program. The Royal Commission report said that when exposed to information that brought to light the illegality of the program, she did nothing of substance. When presented with opportunities to obtain advice on the lawfulness of the practice, she failed to act. Campbell would eventually be suspended without pay from her roughly $900,000 a year government job before going on to resign in 2023. But justice? Campbell didn't just survive the early Robodebt fallout in 2017, she prospered. In 2017, she was promoted to lead the Department of Social Services, before moving on to Foreign Affairs and Trade. Granted, she was dumped by Labor when they took office, but she was quickly parachuted back into a $900,000 a year job on AUKUS with the Department of Defence. I'd hazard a guess that in the 6 or so years between 2017 and her eventual resignation, she earned around the same amount of money as someone on the average wage would collect over a 40-year career. And who knows whether or not she retained the lucrative sounding pension. There were plenty of other political figures involved, but if I cover everything, this will run for 3 hours. If you'd like a full Robodebt rundown and history lesson, go check out The Knights in Shining Llama. He covered it all, it was good stuff.
We brought the previous government to justice over Robodebt.
So where was this justice? All I've seen is a bunch of highly paid politicians being allowed to resign of their own accord, retaining whatever political dignity they had left, and moving on to what we can only assume are even higher paying gigs. I know, the Royal Commission report does have a sealed section, but this isn't Cosmo. The report came out well over a year ago now, and we've heard nothing on that front, besides the National Anti-Corruption Commission referral, that is. And surely, after all the Royal Commission uncovered, there'd be something for the NAC to work with.
Nope.
The NAC announced on June 6th that it would not investigate the referrals because the conduct of the 6 public officials had already been explored by the Royal Commission into the Robodebt scheme. As former New South Wales Supreme Court Judge and former Assistant Commissioner to the New South Wales Independent Commission Against Corruption, Anthony Wheely, highlighted the Royal Commissioner, Kathryn had no jurisdiction to make findings on whether people referred to it had engaged in corrupt conduct or should be otherwise dealt with within the meaning of the legislation. Commissioner Holmes made specific referrals to the NAC in order for that body to determine corrupt conduct. Whaley went on to say that, in fact, she delayed her report for a week to make sure that the NAC was open for business. It simply is no answer to say, as they did say, these people have already been investigated. Of course they've been investigated, but what had not occurred was a determination by the only body with the jurisdiction to do so, whether the conduct in question constituted corrupt conduct. Remember when we were promised an anti-corruption commission with teeth?
I want an anti-corruption commission that will hold the political system to account.
Simpler times.
The Australian Public Service Commissioner has confirmed that a handful of public servants have been found to have breached the Public Service Code of Conduct and had sanctions applied to them. Sanctions meaning fines, reduction in pay and reductions in classification, not employment termination. Back in May, the Commissioner promised to provide a public statement on the outcomes of their investigation in a month or so. Well, it's been 3 months now and I can't see any statement posted on their website.
Sorry, we're getting some breaking news.
And just when I thought I was wrapping this video up, the Australian Public Service Commissioner finally released a statement.
Today, I released the findings of the Robodebt Centralised Code of Conduct Inquiry. 2 independent reviewers, supported by a team of investigators, have examined the actions and decisions of a small group of senior public servants that were referred to me for suspected breaches of the Australian Public Service Code of Conduct. They found that 12 people breached the Code of Conduct on 97 occasions. The breaches include lack of care and diligence, lack of honesty and integrity, as well as misleading others and failing to uphold the Australian Public Service values. Sanctions were recommended for each current public servant, including reprimands, fines and demotions. Breaches by former public servants range in gravity from moderate to very serious. Had those people not already resigned or retired from the public service, they would have faced similar sanctions and, in some instances, termination of their employment. The former public servants that were found to have breached the Code of Conduct are required to declare that breach if they seek re-employment in the public service over the next 5 years.
I included that for completeness really, because it hasn't really told us anything we didn't already know. Anyway, back to the original video. Whether or not you feel that the previous government have been brought to justice over Robodebt or not may well depend on how you define justice. To me, allowing those involved to resign or retire, to walk off into the sunset, or onto more financially lucrative endeavours, that's not justice. I'd be surprised if there were too many of the victims of Robodebt or their families that feel as though justice has been served here.
A crude and cruel mechanism, neither fair nor legal, and it made many people feel like criminals.
In a country where we jail whistleblowers and drag them through the ringer for doing the right thing, how can you say that those behind Robodebt have been brought to any measure of justice?